We complain about legroom, but what if leisure travel meant risking your life, carrying all your own luggage, and potentially dying just to see a different cathedral? Today, we're looking at the evolution of the vacation. To understand the modern vacation, we have to look back 2,000 years to ancient Rome. This wasn't just a trip, it was a mass migration of the elite. If Rome was the New York of the ancient world, then the Bay of Naples was its Hamptons. Every summer, the Mediterranean heat brought with it dual threats of typhoid and malaria, effectively forcing the imperial capital to empty out. The entire fashionable world, the Bella Gente, would venture 100 miles south to the sun-drenched shores of Campania to recreate themselves. These weren't just simple huts. Emperors built luxury palaces here, and millionaires followed suit with sumptuous villas. Life here was designed for absolute indulgence. The courtyards of these retreats were intricately engraved with patterns of waves, creating a seamless visual transition between the villa and the sea. And the swimming, it was a highlight. These Romans specifically sought out these warm, protected shores because they were terrified of the deep water, where they believed sea monsters and evil spirits prowled. They built direct pathways from their living rooms down to sandy coves, creating a private paradise that, in many ways, mirrors the beach resorts we flock to today. It's a striking reality. The sun-drenched shores of Campania are still as much a draw today as they were during the height of the Roman Empire. We are still seeking that exact same escape, the same sun-drenched peace that the Romans perfected over 2 millennia ago. The Roman Empire fell at the end of the 4th century, and travel, along with a whole lot of other progress, was dealt a major blow. The Dark Ages set in, and for the average person, travel became the opposite of a vacation. Almost all movement across the landscape was now undertaken for only 3 reasons: to plunder your neighbors, to trade for survival, or to head out on a religious crusade. The roads had fallen into total disrepair, and it was a dangerous, often brutal undertaking. But there was one rare exception: the royal progress. Once or twice a year, kings and queens would embark on these elaborate trips through their lands. It's easy to think this was all leisure, but it was actually a high-stakes publicity stunt. Without Twitter or magazines to provide the masses with a quick update, the king or queen had to literally ride into each town on horseback. They needed to meet the local power brokers and provide the common people with a fleeting glimpse of their face to remind everyone who was in charge. It was the ultimate photo op, just a few centuries before the camera was ever invented. These royal trips were the only time we see the leisure of the elite surviving in an age where simply stepping outside your village could cost you your life. As we moved into the Renaissance, the world started to wake up again, but for a long time, the gains in travel were marginal. Roads were still in disrepair, and if you wanted to go on vacation, you practically needed your own private army just to stay safe. But that all changed in the 17th century when a new trend took hold: the grand tour. Rich, cultured young men began reviving the old Roman tradition of touring the continent. In many ways, these young men were the original influencers. Armed with early travel guidebooks like Joseph Addison's Remarks on Several Parts of Italy, they weren't just traveling for fun. They were there to better their minds, collect art, and bring home culture to show off to people stuck back home, back in cold, dreary Northern Europe. Take the poet Goethe, for example. His famous Italian journey didn't just document a trip, it laid the foundation for an enduring, romantic love of all things Italian. It was during this era that our modern language for travel was born. In 1772, a journal account of a Scottish adventure mentioned a tourist, a man who was apparently so fascinated by his surroundings that he even stopped to draw the vast flocks of geese he saw on his journey. It wasn't about the destination yet, it was about the status of having been there. The grand tour turned travel into a lifestyle, a badge of sophistication that would eventually change the world. While the aristocrats were off on their grand tours, a different kind of revolution was happening back home. The Industrial Revolution had transformed society, leading to a massive explosion in population and eventually spending power. In 1825, George and Robert Stephenson built Locomotion No. 1, the first public steam train in the world, and by the 1840s, the landscape was being crisscrossed by railroads. This changed everything. Then came Thomas Cook. In 1841, he founded what is widely considered the world's first public travel agency. Before Cook, travel agencies were only for governments and armies, but Cook saw a new market. He realized that if he chartered a train, he could take hundreds of people on a journey for the price of a single shilling. Mass tourism had officially arrived. It was during this time that the very word vacation was born. Wealthy New Yorkers began vacating their homes for the summer, heading out to cooler, greener pastures. By 1915, even middle and working class Americans were finding short vacations affordable, leading to the rise of campsites and budget-friendly hotels. Even the oceans were getting smaller. What started as a grueling 16-day steamship journey across the Atlantic in 1838 was whittled down to just 6 days by the turn of the century. But make no mistake, even with these gains, international leisure travel remained the preserve of the rich and famous. The Wright brothers' first flight in 1903 was revolutionary, but it was just the beginning. It took 25 years for the first commercial transatlantic flight to occur, not by plane, but by a German Zeppelin. For a brief moment, it seemed like these giant airships were the future, especially as they soared over city skylines like New York in 1930. But history is rarely a straight line. When the hydrogen-filled Hindenburg burst into flames in 1937, it was a tragedy that turned the world's back on airships and suddenly made the airplane seem like the only viable future. Pan Am changed the game in 1955 with their purchase of 20 Boeing 707 jetliners, followed by a massive order of 25 Boeing 747s in 1966 for a staggering $525 million. Suddenly, the world was shrinking and the package holiday was born. In 1950, tourists were first flown from London to beachfront campsites in Corsica. Soon, governments like Spain's were commissioning endless resorts along the Costa del Sol to cater to the new masses. In the last few decades, we've seen a shift back towards boutique, off-the-beaten-track experiences, echoing the mindset of those 18th century grand tourists. But we have to be honest about the reality of our modern era. Leisure travel is still a luxury. For billions of people, travel is still only for work, education, or access to medical care. Those of us who travel extensively are often blessed by life circumstances and luck, rather than just a positive mindset. In fact, for a staggering 80% of the global population, simply boarding an aeroplane would be an uncharted territory. So, as we look to the stars and the deep oceans as our next frontiers, it's worth pausing to reflect on how far we've come, and how many people are still waiting for the opportunity to see what's on the other side of that mountain.